welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm Terry Morelli, House Democratic Leader. And before we get started, I just want to say that it's been a sad couple of weeks in the New Hampshire Legislature, from the loss of Representative Dan Carr and the loss of Representative Leo Pino, and then just last night, longtime lobbyist, and in fact the first Democrat ever elected to the House from Carroll County, Liz Murphy, passed away. So I just want to say that our thoughts and prayers are with all of their families, because we think of them as family members here in the legislature. With Veto Day behind us, the people of New Hampshire can breathe a sigh of relief, because we have hopefully seen the last session day of Speaker Bill O'Brien and his extreme Republican majority. This Republican majority has had the wrong priorities for New Hampshire's middle-class families and the wrong priorities for our state's economy. Instead of working to strengthen the economy, they pushed an extreme agenda that was more focused on taking away birth control than on helping our families succeed. An agenda that was more focused on hurting the workers in our state than in helping our state's economy and our future. For the last 2 years, Bill O'Brien and his Tea Party allies have advanced a laundry list of out-of-touch legislation that shows just how wrong their priorities are for New Hampshire. Republicans attempted to raise health care costs for families by eliminating guaranteed insurance coverage for contraception. They enacted the largest single cut to a public university in the history of our country, resulting in tuition increases at our state colleges and universities of nearly double digits. They cut school aid, raising local property taxes, even as they plan to send millions to private schools and religious schools. They cut mental health, developmental disabilities, and other services that are critical to the lives of many Granite Staters, even as they lined the pockets of the big tobacco companies. As we look back at what this legislature has done, we must also look forward to what they say they will do next. The threat of Governor John Lynch's veto pen has helped, fortunately, to halt some of the most outrageous plans of this legislature. But now, Bill O'Brien is running a full slate of candidates for the state Senate, and Ovid LaMontagne and Kevin Smith have promised their full support to Bill O'Brien. Next on their agenda is state takeover of Medicare, which would allow politicians in the New Hampshire legislature to cut benefits for seniors, to increase premiums, and even to raise the eligibility age. If Bill O'Brien gets the gavel again, there will be a renewed effort to criminalize doctors and women for abortion, even when the woman is a victim of rape or incest. And they'll try again to raise health care costs on women by allowing employers to deny their employees birth control coverage. And Speaker O'Brien has already promised to cut more to critical programs. In fact, they've already passed legislation in this term that will reduce state revenues somewhere between $150 and $300 million in the next biennium, without identifying what programs they plan to eliminate. There's no doubt his cuts will once again target higher education, which would put the dream of a college degree out of reach for many students across our state. These are the wrong priorities for our middle-class families. These are the wrong priorities for our state's economy. New Hampshire can move forward if we have common sense legislators who will focus on seeking middle ground and will work towards solutions that are right for all of our families. Before I turn it over to Senator Lou D'Alessandro, who, with others, will begin to review some of the radical legislation that this Tea Party House has championed over the last year and a half, I want to just talk for a moment about the Speaker's removal of the sole Democratic member, Kathy Taylor, from a health care panel. By doing this, the Speaker has once again moved to limit full public discussion by removing an experienced and valued voice from the table. The Speaker has demonstrated time and time again that he will not tolerate viewpoints that differ from his own, and that he will dismiss the representative voice of a significant segment of New Hampshire voters. Unfortunately, the Speaker has raised the level of confrontation in this House, not only between the Legislature and anyone else within our chamber that does not share his views, but it seems that he has gone out of his way to create confrontation between the Legislature and the judicial branch, between the Legislature and the executive branch, between the state legislature and the federal government, and even between the state legislature and local communities. Whether he's trying to force the Attorney General to join a lawsuit, superimposing the will of the legislature on the court's ability to enact its own administrative rules, refusing to plan or even participate in the implementation of the constitutional part of the federal health care reform, or whether it's prohibiting local school districts from offering rigorous programs as part of their school curriculum, his actions now and over the last 17 months have been simple tyranny. I certainly look forward to November, when the people will have the last word on Speaker O'Brien and his Tea Party agenda. And now I'd like to turn it over to Senator Lou D'Alessandro.
Thank you very much, Representative Corelli. I too would like to express my deep sympathy with the passing of Representative Pito, Representative Carr, and Liz Murphy. Many of you know Liz Murphy has been around here for almost a century, to be honest with you. Although we were on different sides of issues, we always had a friendly exchange. Leo Pepino was a constituent of mine from Manchester, served 11 terms in the House, and was an alderman in our city. Certainly we're very sympathetic to his family on his passing. The official numbers for this year will come out at 3 o'clock this afternoon, but I want to focus on a couple of budget items that I think are very significant and show you where the priorities were in terms of this budget cycle. First is the 10-cent increase in the cigarette tax. The cigarette tax will be $11.6 billion under estimate for this fiscal year. $11.6 billion. That's with the 10-cent decrease. That was supposed to produce a volume of increase in sales. Didn't happen. That was a decision that will affect the operating budget for $11.6 billion less to move forward than we had. In other areas, particularly the funding of education, which will be mentioned by my colleague Senator Kelly, think of economic opportunity and job creation as the key elements of this session. How do you bolster economic recovery and job creation? You provide opportunities for youngsters to go on, get themselves better educated so they can be big performers in this world. We are going to be looking at a significant deficit for this fiscal year. Now, with the lapses and with some changes that may be made, deficit may be in the vicinity of 30 million or so. Our revenues for this month will probably be 6.7 billion off of plan. So as we move forward, think of the decisions that were made. And when you talk about the 11.6 negative in terms of the tobacco tax, you can understand some of those decisions were totally inappropriate. I'd like to turn it over to Senator Molly Kelly to talk to you about education. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator D'Alessandro, and good morning to all of you here this morning on this beautiful morning in New Hampshire. As you heard from Representative Morelli, this legislature has, and at every occasion, chosen to advocate for a more radical policy across the board. And that has catered to the extreme conservative ideology, I believe, to the detriment of New Hampshire's middle class. Nowhere is that more true in their misplaced education priorities. Last week, we heard from a Republican state representative in Laconia who said that attendance in public education leads to a life of crime. The Republican gubernatorial candidate, Ovid LaMontagne's response was, people are entitled to their own opinions. Well, I would say what that candidate did not say, and that is that education policy should not be developed based on false opinions. Our children cannot afford it. After all, remember that this legislature tried to eliminate public kindergarten and to tell children that they do not have to go to school at all. This legislature cut funding for higher education in New Hampshire. Our public colleges, our universities, and our community colleges nearly in half, raising tuition costs on families across our state and creating further barriers for our own New Hampshire students to go to college. They cut state aid to local schools, raising local property taxes. And this legislature told us we could not afford to support education. Yet, at the same time that they were cutting higher education and local school funding, they cut the tobacco tax and made it easier for people to evade taxes. Changes that have cost, as Senator D'Alessandro has said, cost millions of dollars. This is money that could have gone to support public education. And now they're proposing to send millions of dollars in taxpayer money to private and religious schools, violating our state constitution in doing so, and causing further harm to the nearly 200,000 students that attend our public schools. Simply put, this Tea Party legislature has made it easier to break the law and buy cigarettes, but harder to afford an education. These are wrong priorities for New Hampshire, and they are wrong priorities for our families and for our economic future and growth. As if these serious and drastic cuts weren't enough, Bill O'Brien has pledged, as you heard, that if given another term as Speaker, he plans to cut another $400 million from the budget, which would mean more cuts to local education aid, raising property taxes again, and raising tuition costs even higher. So I want to thank you, and I'd like to turn the podium over to Representative Steve Schertel.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everybody. For a group of people who came into office at the start of 2011, promising to focus on the economy like a laser, you've got to ask yourself, do they really understand how a laser is supposed to work? The only laser-like focus I've seen this legislative session has been in advancing their right-wing, radical social agenda. And how do we know that they favor a far-right social agenda? Rather than focusing on the important issue of jobs and the economy, their actions speak for them. This far-right Republican legislature attached a radical anti-choice amendment requiring a 24-hour waiting period for abortions, which the Senate had already rejected, to an important bipartisan research and development tax credit bill, an action for which the Speaker was justifiably criticized by the Business and Industry Association. This far-right Republican legislature has voted to defund Planned Parenthood, an action that could put New Hampshire's entire Medicaid program at risk. And more importantly, it denies women access to essential health care services such as cancer screening. This legislature has fought time and time again to put the state between women and their health care decisions. Bill O'Brien's Tea Party legislature voted to increase costs on women by repealing coverage of contraception and even mandating that doctors provide false information to patients seeking abortions. This legislature has brought guns into the State House, including the Visitors Gallery, where fourth graders studying New Hampshire history come to our legislature to see their government in operation. They've tried putting guns in our college dormitories, in our county nursing homes, as well as the Soldiers' Home in Tilton. They've tried passing legislation that would let convicted felons carry guns. They passed the New Hampshire version of Florida's Stand Your Ground legislation, and we've all seen the deadly consequences of that legislation. They have even worked to overturn New Hampshire's domestic violence protection laws that are the model for other state legislatures. This is not the agenda the voters of this state thought they were getting in 2010. And it's not the agenda that the people of New Hampshire can afford in their future. Thank you. It is a great pleasure that I introduce my friend and colleague, Representative Gary Richardson.
Thank you, Steve. My name is Gary Richardson. I'm the Democratic floor leader in the New Hampshire House of Representatives. The past 2 years have been extraordinary, not just in terms of the radical legislation that's been proposed, some of which actually passed over the governor's veto, but in terms of how members of the New Hampshire House were treated by this speaker. The legislative process should be a collaboration of ideas to come up with the best possible solutions. This past session, has been my way or the highway. My Republican colleagues in the House like to remind us that elections have consequences, and they are correct. However, it's easy to misinterpret the results of an election, and the majority party does so at its peril. Certainly, there was no mandate for the lack of respect, the lack of civility. In fact, the downright hostility toward opposing viewpoints had been exhibited during the past 2 years. This refusal to reach out to others for ideas and to allow the minority party, or in fact even moderate Republicans who do not share the Speaker's ideology to express ideas, has resulted in the legislation that you've just heard described. For example, the Committee of Conference on Constitutional Amendment on Education Funding, no Democrat was appointed as a sitting member of the committee. No Democrat was allowed to participate. The result was an amendment that everyone could hate, that prevented passage of an amendment to allow targeting, something that most people would support. Why? Because the amendment was corrupted with language seeking to grant unlimited authority to the legislature over education, to give the legislature total control without checks and balances. Other examples, the refusal to put Democrats on committees of conference, the removal of Republican committee members and Democratic committee members, the removal of committee officials whenever they failed to do exactly what the Speaker wanted them to do. The Speaker has even refused to put a Democrat on the orientation committee for new members. Apparently, a 3-to-1 majority is not enough if you can't stand dissent. These things may seem like inside baseball to the public, but the way you treat other people, particularly when you are in a position of power, is a matter of character. The voters are looking for more from us. A recent poll in New Hampshire has identified the New Hampshire legislature as being the second biggest problem facing the state after the economy. Ideology has taken precedence over civility and practical solutions to our problems. This morning we've heard about legislation eliminating insurance coverage for birth control, cutting aid to UNH and local schools, and downshifting costs to local property taxes, while creating tax credits to fund religious schools. We've heard about attempts to take over Medicare for our seniors from the federal government, defunding Planned Parenthood, placing limits on women's right to abortion. The list goes on and on. Unfortunately, the only protection against the Speaker's extreme agenda is the governor, and the Republican candidates for governor have not only refused to separate themselves from this Speaker, but they have adopted much of his rhetoric. Ovid LaMontagne has said that taking over Medicaid would be a top priority for his administration. Is this so we can spend less money, which means less health care for our citizens? Or does he really believe that there's no such thing as economies of scale, and 50 states running their own health care programs can do so more efficiently than the federal government? Kevin Smith has said that he supports getting rid of Planned Parenthood. Who does he think is going to provide health care to women in the North Country? For our government to function, we need leaders who are in the mainstream, not leaders who are governed by slash-and-burn ideology, where tactics are to refuse to compromise, to suspend the rules, and to cram through radical legislation written by out-of-state special interest groups. The only protection against people like this speaker is the ballot box. In November, the voters will have a clear choice. Do they want continuation of this legislature's radical and out-of-the-mainstream ideological agenda, or do they want leaders who can return us to sanity? I thank you very much, and if there are questions, the speakers will be happy to address them. Thank you.